Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Jonathan Moulton. Jonathan is a man who was born in 1726 and he was known for his military career. He served in King George's War as well as in the French and Indian Wars, but after his service is where this story really starts. Basically, after his time fighting was over, he went on to become one of New England's wealthiest men. This caused heads to swivel and rumors to swirl because this wasn't something that was normally seen. This all gave way for the rumor that Jonathan had struck this luck of fortune because he was actually working with the devil. People began to say that for financial gain, he in turn gave his eternal devotion and even his soul over to the devil. The devil would visit him every month in order to fill his boot up with gold. You know what happens with things like this though, people get greedy. It is said that despite this lavish lifestyle he was already living, he wanted more, and this led him to make the mistake of trying to trick the devil. He cut a hole in the floor above his basement and placed a boot over it, which also had a hole in the heel. Of course he did this so that when the devil came with the gold, he'd get a whole basement full rather than just a boot. But the devil certainly caught on. From there, it is said that he burned down Jonathan's house along with all of the gold that lay inside. So the moral of the story is don't try and trick the devil. Just kidding, it's don't be greedy. Moving on to our number 9 spot today, we have Laura. Okay, so I like to believe that exorcisms are a thing of the past, but that is certainly not true. For this story, we're only taking it back a few years to 2015. This is when a 22-year-old woman who is only known by the name Laura went to a local Lutheran church where those around her prayed for her soul and for redemption. The church's bishop, Manuel Acuna, told them, quote, "The demon exists. He's not an idea, he's not a theory, he's not something abstract. The devil is a personality and therefore has a strategy. We are talking about something terrifying, a fallen angel. The devil is not a metaphor." This is when they then took Laura into a chamber and began performing an exorcism. A local man who was there to pray for her was even quoted as saying, "We could hear her screaming and crying and we prayed for her deliverance. She was a good girl but turned bad when the devil possessed her. She had to be exorcised. She had to be free." In the end, it is said that the exorcism was successful and that Laura was free from the demons that are said to have been controlling her. In our number 8 spot today, we have Anna Eklund. This is the real story behind the one that was made famous by the 2016 horror film, The Exorcism of Anna Eklund. In reality, the name of the woman who this story happened to is Emma Schmidt, and she was born back in 1882. It is said that once she got a little bit older, she began exhibiting some strange behavior, like being clearly uncomfortable or unable to deal with holy objects, quote, disturbed thoughts, and the inability to enter churches. Many people believed that she was possessed, and they also believed that the source of this possession was her Aunt Mina. Mina was said to be a local witch who was placing spells on herbs for the food she prepared, and it is said that she was also the lover of Emma's father. Because of this belief that she was possessed, this sent Emma into a wild few years that involved 2 long exorcisms. The final of the 2 lasted from August 18th to December 23rd, 1928, and in the end, it is said that it was successful. People reported that afterwards she only exhibited, quote, milder and, quote, quite manageable possessions. So I guess that's good news. In our number 7 spot today, we have Maricicia Irina Cornici. Sorry. This scary story came to us pretty recently, in 2005. A Romanian nun named Maricicia was only 23 years old when she began to hear voices. Despite the knowledge of mental health and mental illness in 2005, because of her background, she began to believe it was the devil speaking to her. She was diagnosed and treated with schizophrenia, but she eventually ended up falling back into this very dangerous way of thinking. This is when she became the subject of an exorcism. She was bound to a cross, which is the scariest beginning of an exorcism I've ever heard of, and after being bound, she was gagged with a towel and left in a convent room for 3 whole days without food or water. Unsurprisingly, this sadly resulted in her death. The priest involved, as well as the other nuns, were charged and convicted in relation to this crime, but most have since been released due to the short sentences they received, and instead of taking responsibility for their horrific actions, they continue to blame her death on adrenaline that was administered to her during the ambulance ride. In our number 6 spot today we have George Lukens. Back in 1778, George Lukens was an English tailor who people began to notice was starting to behave in ways that were considered strange. What I mean by this is that it was said that he started speaking in strange voices, making strange sounds, and that he was even singing hymns backwards. Of course, this was 1778 after all, so they decided that an exorcism was in order. They had the event in Bristol's Temple Church, and they had 7 priests come to assist, as it is said that he didn't just have the devil hanging over him, but that he actually had 7 different demons. The priests commanded the demons who had taken over his soul to leave once and for all. Surprisingly, it is said that this ceremony actually worked, and that when it was over, George recited the Lord's Prayer, thanked all of the priests, and went on his merry way. An exorcism with a happy ending. Don't see a lot of those. In our number 5 spot today, we have Gottlieben Dittus. This story comes to us from 1842 from a small German village. In this year, residents of the village began to notice some strange happenings coming from the house of a 28-year-old woman named Gottlieben. She was claiming that her house was haunted, and she began slipping in and out of what people referred to as trance-like states. Other than these claims and what was going on with these states, nothing truly extraordinarily weird was happening, of course, until a religious pastor came along and began performing an exorcism. Gottlieben became super violent, which feels like a pretty fair reaction to an exorcism, whether you were being possessed or not, and she ended up being physically restrained. Here's where things really go off the rails though. She ended up being restrained for 2 years. 2 years. Not months, not days, not weeks, years, while multiple exorcisms were performed on her. During these, she was seen vomiting glass, nails, and of course blood. Despite this horrific story, things ended on an alright note, with her telling everyone that the demons were gone and that Jesus is the victor. In our number 4 spot today, we have Dr. Richard Gallagher. I'm a person who likes to believe in and follow science. You know, it's like the most tangible way to explain things that are seemingly impossible or unreal. You know what I mean? That is why this guy kind of freaks me out so much. So basically, Dr. Richard Gallagher is a certified Ivy League psychiatrist, and he is a self-proclaimed man of science. Like many science people, when he initially heard of exorcisms or possessions, he thought that they were just an ancient and outdated excuse or explanation for people who were actually struggling with different mental illness. Now, however, while still being that self-proclaimed man of science, he had an experience that changed his perspective forever on demonic possession. Basically, it all started when he met someone who is referred to as the Queen of Satan. Her real name was Julia, and she came to the church claiming possession. Considering the fact that she was involved of and part of a satanic cult, he wanted to know why, if she really was possessed, that she would want to rid herself of the demons. When the two sat down together, weird things started. She knew strange, intimate details of his life that she had absolutely no reason to know. Objects would randomly fly off of the walls, and later, long after their meeting, during a phone call with a priest, both Richard and the priest he was speaking to heard one of the demonic voices it is said that Julia would speak in over the phone, despite the fact that she was literally on the other side of the country from them. In the end, it is said that this experience in meeting the Queen of Satan and all of the subsequent meetings with people like her that he had afterwards caused him to completely change his outlook. He now sits on the line in between the world of science and reason and the world of the unexplainable. In our number 3 spot today, we have Michael Taylor. This story is about an Englishman named Michael Taylor, and it starts off in 1974. Michael was a husband and father of 5 children, but was unfortunately struggling with frequent bouts of depression, which is difficult for anyone to manage. Seemingly, however, when he met a 21-year-old pastor named Marie Robinson, these bouts became less harsh and more manageable. So far, this seems like a nice little story about someone getting the help they need, but that is not the case at all. Apparently, he claimed his depression was getting better due to the pastor's ability to exorcise the demons that were plaguing him with this illness. Michael's wife is like, yeah, okay, likely story, and she confronts him about what she believes is going on, which is that he is having an affair with Mary. After this confrontation, he physically attacks his wife, which then led to him getting an actual exorcism by 2 ministers on October 5th, 1974. During this exorcism, Michael had seizures, he spit and bit the ministers, and he screamed in tongues. After going through all of that, you'd expect this guy to be free of whatever the heck was going on, but unfortunately, the following day, he brutally took the life of his own wife. If all of this wasn't enough to make a dreadful story, he ended up not even being convicted because the defense argued that the exorcism made him insane. So, cursed by the devil or just a terrible person. At this point, we're not really sure. Maybe a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. In our number 2 spot today, we have The Bell Witch. So this story is one that inspired one of the most classic horror films of all time, The Blair Witch Project. Basically, this story follows the family of John Bell, who is said to have once had this wicked neighbor called Kate Batts. Kate believed that John cheated her out of land, and since there were rumors swirling that she was a witch, there was also a rumor that she cursed the Bell family. Basically, this made it so that the family was now being cursed and basically haunted by a demon. This force would throw pots and pans, spill things, slam doors, rattle chains. It would have members of the family getting scratched, pinched, and sometimes worse by this invisible thing. Things were bad, and when people came to visit the family at the farm, they didn't get any trouble from the spirit, but could hear its voice that was described as being high, scratchy, and shrill. In the end, the farm became an incredibly popular tourist attraction, and one year, John fell mysteriously ill, which people believe was the work of Kate and her powerful spells. To this day, people still report strange happenings at the farm. In our number 1 spot today, we have Urbain Grandier. Born in 1590, Urbain was a French Catholic priest who is known as being a little promiscuous with some of the nuns. Look, there's no judgment from me at all, but I'm just saying, the Catholic Church now doesn't like that. I can't imagine pre-1600s Catholic Church just being cool with that, but anyway, it's said that he actually took quite a public stance against the church's view on celibacy. Because of his escapades, there were points where people who had indulged with him were now accusing him of witchcraft and using dark magic in order to tempt them. This led to a trial which did end in acquittal, but France's chief minister named Cardinal did not like Urbain at all. The priest had apparently published some less than kind criticisms about him, so naturally Cardinal returned the favor and ordered a second trial. This time Urbain was put through some grueling interrogations, and while it certainly was inhumane, it led to the discovery of quite a document, one that was apparently found in his belongings. It was a contract that is said to have been written in Latin and covered with strange symbols. The contract was signed by Urbain as well as several demons, including the devil himself. Basically, the contract promised Urbain the love of women, the respect of monarchs, that sort of thing, in exchange for his allegiance to the devil. In the end, this led to Urbain being found guilty of making a deal with the devil, and he was sentenced to death.
Coming up in our number 10 spot, we have Jack Parsons. Known for being an American engineer, Jack Parsons was alive from 1914 to 1952. He grew up reading sci-fi stories about rocket ships and people going out into space. Apparently, when he was 13 years old, he planned to sell his soul to the devil in exchange for a real live rocket ship. Of course, it didn't work out, but he didn't let it discourage him, and as he grew older, he tried to create a rocket engine powerful enough to travel to outer space. Apparently, in his 20s, he began to follow occult leader Aleister Crowley, and he attempted at doing a spell himself called the Babylon Working. This spell was supposed to help him summon a goddess by the name of Babylon that would help men go to the moon someday. Jack ended up inventing jet fuel that is used by NASA even today, so arguably his spell worked. Or perhaps the devil helped him out and he actually sold his soul without knowing it. I guess we'll never know. In our number 9 spot, we have Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was a very known guitarist of his time. Robert was alive from 1911 to 1938. Not a very long life, and it's probably because the devil said to him, "Come home, my child." Or so I imagine. Word on the street is that he apparently grew up quite poor and wanted a prosperous life, and so he went to the crossroads of a major highway and made a deal with the devil himself. He wrote a song called Me and the Devil Blues, where he talks about walking alongside with the devil. So honestly, that's all the proof I need. He died at only 27 years old, and his music became quite popular after his passing. He apparently was forgiven for his sins after he passed, and was then allowed to be buried in the Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church in Mississippi. In our number 8 spot, we have Bob Dylan. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. Bob Dylan, Melissa, the musical icon. Do you really think he sold his soul to the devil? Look, I'm just here to present the evidence. You can decide, you can speculate. There is some evidence that points to this being a possibility, and even I'm quite shook. You may or may not know of the song he wrote called Crossroads, where he tells the story of him being at a crossroads with his soul. In the song, he talks about falling to his knees and pleading to the Lord to save his soul. But then he also says, "And I'm standing at the crossroads, believe I'm sinking down." Sinking down into the fiery pits of hell, perhaps? Some speculate that this crossroads that he is referring to is the same crossroads where Robert Johnson supposedly offered his soul to the devil. Apparently, in an interview once while talking about the song, Bob is quoted as saying, "I made a bargain with it a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end." Whatever it is, we never found out, but since he sunk down, I'm going to say that it was probably with Lucifer himself. In our number 7 spot, we have Niccolò Paganini. I really tried with the accent. Born in Italy in 1782, Niccolò was known for being a professional violinist. By the age of 12, he was already touring and doing shows, and by 15, he went on a world tour. Apparently his mom was such a hardcore stage mom that people of the time believed that she summoned Satan to make sure her son sold out concerts. Love this. Even in the 1700s, momagers existed. People also believed that he himself was walking with the devil. Probably a bad rumor because he was so talented, and jealousy probably took over his competitors of the time. But maybe there was some basis for this, as he was said to have abnormally long fingers that moved so quickly, and his skin was very rubbery-like. There are medical explanations for this today, but perhaps people of the time thought that they were witnessing a magical being of some sort, and that's why they attributed it to the devil. Apparently on his deathbed, he freaked out when a Catholic priest came to pray for him, and he said that he would be saved, and for the priest to leave. Spoiler alert, he was not saved, but this last act was all people needed to hear to confirm their speculations. In our number 6 spot, we have Jimmy Page. Yep, another one that I find surprising, but honestly, I'm more of a pop hip-hop listener, so it's not surprising that I'm a little ignorant to the goings-on within a hardcore rock band, so yeah. Jimmy Page was the guitarist for the band Led Zeppelin. Apparently he was very interested in occult teachings, and specifically by the famous occultist Aleister Crowley. He was such a huge fan that he ended up buying Aleister's home in Scotland. He would relay stories about scary sounds he would hear in the house and of how people had died there. This of course led people to think that he was probably involved in some kind of dark magic like a lot of musicians, and quite possibly sold his soul to the devil. Because of his reputation, people began to believe the other band members were Satanists as well. Apparently people believe that if you play Stairway to Heaven backward, you hear demon-like voices. Holy crap, that's terrifying. Can someone do it and maybe report back to me? Okay, thanks. In our number 5 spot, we have Antoine Rose, the iconic witch that led to the world understanding that where there is a witch, there is a magical broomstick. Antoine's story is a tragic one. In today's society, she would be known as a poor single mother that turned to illicit substances. But in the year 1477, the world was much different. Apparently, Antoine was convinced that another witch tried to kidnap her son, but her and her son stabbed the witch in the arm to stop her. Witnesses of the time swore that she spoke to the devil, asking him for help, most likely in a trance-like state from an illicit substance, but again, this was a different time. These witnesses watched her slather on an ointment on a broomstick and placed it in between her legs. Apparently the ointment was a psychedelic herb that can only be absorbed through the skin, so it makes sense as to why she maybe did it this way. Anyways, long story short, she was accused of being a witch, and she eventually confessed to working with the devil. But when you think about it, she probably did think that she had been working with the devil because perhaps she had a weird trip where she believed she spoke to a spirit, and if she didn't have anyone to say, "Hey gal, that's totally normal when you have a crazy trip," like the thousands of people online seem to say, then she probs did think she was crazy and that she had talked to the devil. In our number 4 spot, we have Gilles de Rais. You may recognize this famous French name as he was a knight that fought alongside Joan of Arc. He was very close friends with Joan and took it very hard when she was kidnapped and burned at the stake. Apparently, after her death, he turned to alchemy and became fascinated with the idea of eternal life. Over the years, he had grown to be one of the richest people in France, and it was said that the Catholic Church was wanting money from him. Ignoring this request, he actually decided to put on a play, but this wasn't just any play, it was a major production with paid actors and set builders alike. It has been said that the church was furious about this, and so they marketed him to the public as a serial killer and convinced them that he worshipped Satan because he practiced alchemy. He was sentenced to death, and afterwards, all of his assets were seized by none other than the Catholic Church. Wow. Look, there's good and bad people in every place of the world, and there's good and bad people that practice every religion. But it just hurts my soul when I hear stories like this because I'm sure there are tons of good Catholics of the world, and this kind of story paints them all as bad. So why do the bad guys always ruin it for everyone else? In our number 3 spot today, we have Giuseppe Tartini. Excuse me as I butcher these Italian names. Give me a pass, I'm British. Just love me. Giuseppe Tartini is known for being a famous Italian composer and violinist. He was more specifically known for being able to play a song that is so complicated, many people today can't even play it. The song is called The Devil's Trill Sonata, and it is a song that he composed after he was apparently woken up by the devil himself. The devil was sitting on the edge of his bed and playing his violin. Apparently after that night, he could magically play trills that are almost impossible for people to play. So naturally, everyone assumed that he made a deal with the devil. I believe it. In our number 2 spot, we have the Salem Witches. Okay, so if you don't know about the Salem witch trials, you should definitely do some Googling tonight after this because this is some juicy history. In the late 1600s, there were many women who were said to be friendly with the devil in Salem, Massachusetts. The people of the town drank some kind of marketing Kool-Aid and were convinced that certain citizens had powers and did rituals in the woods. A total of 25 people lost their lives during these trials, and of course, these accusations were never proven, and many years later, it was discovered that it really was a lie that spread like wildfire. A super sad story and a pretty crazy part of American history. In our number 1 spot, we have Aleister Crowley himself. Known for referring to himself as the Beast or the Antichrist, Aleister Crowley is a very famous occult leader and magician. He is also known for having occult gatherings where people were encouraged to explore each other naked while they would do rituals. He was kicked out of Italy in 1923 for word of these gatherings had gotten around. He was once quoted as saying that God and Satan fought over his soul. And I guess we can assume that Satan won because he would highly encourage people to focus on selfish acts which were considered satanic at the time. Or perhaps still is, depending on who you ask and what religion you were brought up with. Crowley was known for saying, "Do what thou wilt," which basically means do whatever you want in life. That is exactly what is promoted in society today, so perhaps maybe he was just a forward thinker of the time. But his own mother would call him Satan, so I'm gonna bet that he probs did sell his soul to the devil.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Johann Faust. According to the stories passed down about this man, it is said that he was an alchemist and astrologer who lived in Germany during the early 1500s. It is said that in his plight to become the smartest man in the world, while also enjoying as many earthly pleasures as possible, he summoned the help of a demon named Mephistopheles. There are terrible stories about how cruel and truly evil this man was, and as a professor, it is said he looked down on everyone else. Local priests apparently believed that he had actually made a deal with the devil in which he sold his soul to him, and there are also other stories that say his pet dog was actually a demon who was able to shapeshift. During his life, he did publish several grimoires, and in 1540, while conducting some sort of alchemic experiment, his laboratory exploded. In our number 9 spot today we have Jonathan Moulton. Jonathan is a man who was born in 1726 and he was known for his military career. He served in King George's War as well as in the French and Indian Wars, but after his service is where the story really starts. Basically, after his time fighting was over, he went on to become one of New England's wealthiest men. This caused heads to swivel and rumors to swirl because this wasn't something that was normally seen. This all gave way for the rumor that Jonathan had struck this luck of fortune because he was actually working with the devil. People began to say that for financial gain, he in turn gave his eternal devotion and even his soul over to the devil. The devil would visit him every month in order to fill up his boot with gold. You know what happens with things like this though, people get greedy. It is said that despite this lavish lifestyle he was already living, he wanted more, and this led him to make the mistake of trying to trick the devil. He cut a hole in the floor above his basement and placed a boot over it, which also had a hole in the heel. Of course, he did this so that when the devil came with the gold, he'd get a whole basement full rather than just the boot. But the devil of course caught on. From there, it is said that the devil burned down Jonathan's house along with all of the gold that lay inside. In our number 8 spot today we have Niccolo Paganini. If you search people who made a deal with the devil, Niccolo is one of the first names that pops up. Niccolo was a professional violinist who was born in 1782. His parents began to send him to lessons when he was just 5 years old, and by age 15 he was already touring the world because he was so talented. What's really interesting about Niccolo and his story, other than his obvious musical genius however, is the rumors surrounding his talent and subsequent recognition. According to some, people believe that his own mother summoned the devil in order for her son to be the extreme talent that he was. There are many modern diagnoses that could potentially explain some of what made Niccolo so talented, and I mean, we all know quite well that sometimes people are just born with extreme talent, but of course in the early 1800s people and their imaginations certainly ran wild. The final reason why people believe he may have made a deal with the devil is because shortly before his death, he was quite sick. The doctors had a feeling he was nearing death, so they sent in a priest to pray over him. When he first saw the priest, it is said that he freaked out and sent the priest away. Many people believe that him pushing the priest away was only a confirmation of the fact that he was working with the devil. In our number 7 spot today we have Theophilus of Adana. For this one we are taking it back a little bit all the way to 538 AD. Theophilus of Adana was a cleric in the Roman Catholic Church. So basically one day he was elected to become the new bishop, but he ended up denying the offer as it is said he wanted a more priestly sort of position instead of one that came with all of that power and responsibility. It is said that he wanted the position of archdeacon, which would have seen him controlling where the donation money went. So apparently in passing on this bishop position, he thought that if he gave the position to his rival, then his rival should at least be grateful enough to give him the position he wanted, but of course, that did not happen. This new bishop gave away the seat that Theophilus wanted and instead gave him the position of being a humble cleric. This made Theo super angry, and this is when he thought that maybe the church isn't as holy as he once thought they were. This is when he decided to summon the help of Satan. He ended up signing a contract with Satan in his own blood. He denounced Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and it is said that with the help of Satan, he was once again voted into the bishop position, and this time he accepted. At this point in time, it is said that he felt so guilty he confessed to this deal with the devil, and the priest who he confessed to decided that they should burn the blood-signed contract. For a second, Theo looked up, but then suddenly he collapsed and died. Many people believe that it was because he had broken his contract. In our number 6 spot today we have Giuseppe Tartini. Giuseppe was an Italian violinist and composer who lived during the 1700s. He went on to compose a song called The Devil's Trill Sonata. Called The Devil's Trill Sonata, and not only this, but he claimed to wake up one night to find Satan sitting on the edge of his bed playing the violin. Seems as though the devil really likes violins, apparently. What's extremely curious is after this alleged encounter, it is said that Giuseppe's violin skills hit heights never seen before. He was able to suddenly play extremely complicated trills that are impossible for most musicians. Apparently even today the sonata is too difficult for most musicians to play, which is why people believe that perhaps this story really was true. In our number 5 spot today we have Urbain Grandier. Born in 1590, Urbain was a French Catholic priest who was known as being a little promiscuous with some of the nuns. Look, there's no judgment from me at all, but I'm just saying, the Catholic Church now doesn't like that. I can't imagine pre-1600s Catholic Church just being cool with that, but anyway, it is said that he actually took quite a public stance against the church's view on celibacy. Because of his escapades, there were points where people who had indulged with him were now accusing him of witchcraft and using dark magic in order to tempt them. This led to a trial which did end in acquittal, but France's chief minister did not like Urbain at all. The priest had apparently published some less than kind criticism about him, so naturally he returned the favor and ordered a second trial. This time Urbain was put through some grueling interrogations, and while it certainly was inhumane, it led to the discovery of quite a document. One that was apparently found in his belongings. It was a contract that is said to have been written in Latin and covered with strange symbols. The contract was signed by Urbain as well as several demons, including the devil himself. Basically, the contract promised him the love of women, the respect of monarchs, that sort of thing, in exchange for his allegiance to the devil. In the end, this led to Urbain being found guilty of making a deal with the devil, and he was sentenced to death. In our number 4 spot today we have Aleister Crowley. This man is quite well known for being the leader of an occult group, and this really does stem back even into his childhood. It is said that quite early on, Aleister started calling himself the Beast and the Antichrist, and he is even quoted as saying that God and Satan fought over his soul. In one of his books he wrote, quote, "I was in the death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those 3 long hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God?" Many people believe that perhaps he made a deal with Satan, but it is possible that these are just rumblings based on Aleister's teachings and beliefs. In our number 3 spot today we have Jack Parsons. Jack was a man who was born just a few years prior to the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, and being born at a time like this had him growing up dreaming of and reading sci-fi novels about rocket ships taking people to space. It is said that this love of rocket ships and these dreams of going to space are what led him to summoning the devil in order to make a deal. Jack wanted to sell his soul in exchange for a rocket ship. This deal didn't end up working, but Jack continued to study science as he grew older. Later in life he stumbled upon the teachings of Aleister Crowley that we just talked about, and this is when he tried his hand at summoning things again. This time he tried to summon a goddess named Babylon that was said to possibly help men get to the moon one day. Technically, in some ways, it worked, because Jack Parsons ended up helping create the jet fuel that is said to still be used today. Maybe it was his original deal with the devil, maybe it was the goddess, or maybe it was just good old passion and drive that did it. I guess that all depends on what you believe. In our number 2 spot today we have Christoph Hasemann. Back in 1677, Christoph was an artist who was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it is said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a really strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon. The dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up it seemed as though he was cured. After this he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him get it back. In our number 1 spot today we have Antoine Rose. This woman from the 15th century is often credited with our modern day image of a witch riding on a broomstick. She became known as the Witch of Savoy, and she is said to have confessed to regularly meeting with the devil. I mean, let's be honest, history doesn't exactly have a good record with those accused of witchcraft, so it isn't quite clear if this deal with the devil was real, or if perhaps Antoine could just Add 1 + 1, and then suddenly she was accused of being a witch and had to find a way to try and defend herself. Legend goes that she was in a position where she was in dire need of money, and when she asked her neighbor for help, they led her to a group of people who convinced her to ask the devil for help. When the devil appeared, he agreed to help her, of course in exchange for her rejection of God and her promise to worship him. Story has it that she said the devil had a low, raspy voice when he appeared to her in human form, and she also apparently said that she was quite afraid of him, which, I don't know, personally makes a lot of sense.
Coming in at number 10 is Mr. Alguin. Ethan Alguin posted online a story that he was told. The story goes, "My grandpa believes he saw the devil. When my dad was a kid, my grandpa used to work at a graveyard. He would get up as it was dark, and within a few hours of working, the sun would come up. One morning, he did what he always had done and got ready for work. As he was walking there, he saw a man in a suit just walking slowly down the street. My grandpa told him something along the lines of, 'May the Lord give you a good morning,' and the guy ignored him and kept walking. My grandpa just ignored it and went to the graveyard as he always had and proceeded to work. After a few hours of work, the sun hadn't started rising yet, and he realized how early he actually woke up, so he went back home. He told my grandma about the guy, and she believes it was something called El Catrin. Apparently, sometimes the devil appears as a very well-dressed person that they refer to as El Catrin. Creepy. Number 9. Johann Georg Forst. This 16th century German astrologer and alchemist was an intelligent and successful man, but this wasn't enough for him. He wanted supreme power and knowledge, so he called upon the devil to provide him with it in return for his soul. For 16 years, he enjoyed his newfound power before he attempted to back out of the agreement. However, the devil convinced him to renew the pact, knowing that upon his death, Johann's soul would reside for eternity in hell. After 24 long years, the devil announced to Johann that his death was approaching. A huge explosion was heard from Johann's room that night, which was believed to be the act of Satan reclaiming his soul. The only thing remaining from the eruption was bits and pieces of Johann's body. Number 8. Sarah Good. Sarah Good was one of the first 3 women to be accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692 in Massachusetts. On March 25th, 1692, Sarah was tried for witchcraft. When she was brought in, the accusers immediately began to rock back and forth and moan, seemingly in response to Sarah's presence. Later in the trial, one of the accusers fell into a fit. Sarah denied the allegations against her, but another woman on trial admitted to being the devil's servant. She stated that a tall man dressed in all black came to them, demanding they sign their names in a great book. Although initially refusing, she eventually wrote her name after Sarah and another woman forced her to. When Sarah was allowed the chance to defend herself in front of the 12 jurors in the Salem Village Meeting House, she argued her innocence, proclaiming the other 2 as real witches. In the end, however, Sarah was convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death. So, did she really see the devil, or was she innocent? Who knows? Number 7. North Berwick Witches. The North Berwick witch trials were in 1590, where a number of people from East Lothian, Scotland were accused of witchcraft. The trials ran for 2 years and implicated over 70 people. The witches allegedly held their covens on the Aled Green, part of the modern-day North Berwick Harbour area. One source for the events is a 1591 pamphlet news from Scotland. King James VI wrote a dissertation on witchcraft and necromancy titled Demonology in 1597. More than 100 suspected witches were arrested, and several confessed under torture to having met with the devil in the church at night and devoted themselves to doing evil, including poisoning the king and other members of his household and attempting to sink the king's ship. Number 6. Andy Berthrin. One day, Andy decided to make a deal with the devil, like someone does. He said, "My family loved God more than me, and I had a teenage reaction and decided to go my own way. I thought I'd make an actual pact with the devil, and the pact went along the lines of, you give me this, and I'll give you my life." He took me at my word, and it was a very conscious decision that I will always regret. Eventually, Andy restored his faith in Christianity, but while Andy acknowledges Jesus' power is not even comparable to Satan's, he says, the devil was not going to let him go easily. He was attacked spiritually, but not just verbally, but physically as well. He said, "There were images and voices. I spent night after night praying against apparitions and stuff all around me all the time. It's a reality. Some people still won't believe it happens, but it does. I clearly remember an elder suggesting I go and pray and read my Bible. I picked up my Bible and it was like someone stabbed me in the eye and it burned so much until I put the Bible down, then it would stop." Number 5. Father Gabriel Amorth. In 1997, Father Gabriel Amorth conducted his exorcisms in Rome, and he asked for the help of Jesus, and the young man he was dealing with began to curse and spit and started using English instead of his native Italian. Screaming and howling, the demon burst forth and looked straight at him, drooling saliva from the young man's mouth. Father Gabriel said he returned fire with prayers and other ritual recitations, demanding that the demon reveal its name. He said, "Unclean spirit, whoever you are and all your companions who possess this servant of God, I command you, tell me your name, the day, and the hour of your damnation." The man fixed him with a glare, snarled, and said, "I am Lucifer." Father Gabriel was shocked. He did not expect to receive such a terrifying response. He mostly used prayer as his weapon, reciting verses of liberation from the Roman rite of exorcism. As Father Gabriel continually commanded the demon to leave its host, it eventually left. But my goodness, that sounds absolutely horrifying. Number 4. The circus. In this story, this man's father told his son about the day he met the devil. It took place in Juarez, Mexico in the year 1942 when his father was 20 years old. The circus had arrived in town and the man's father and his younger brother went to check it out, and they ran into a short, stubby man wearing a dinner jacket. This stranger introduced himself and said he auditioned for a job at the circus, but the owner turned him down because his act was so frightening that the owner accused him of being the devil. They asked if they could see the trick, and he said yes, but they would have to come to the trailer where he lives. They went to the stranger's place, and he put on a cape and a white glove on his right hand. He started running his left hand over, under, and around his gloved right hand, all while closing and opening his right hand and wiggling his fingers. The stranger then started chanting some strange words in another language. Then he grabbed the tip of the white glove and removed his glove. His hand was gone. It was all bones from his skeleton. The brothers ran out scared, and the stranger stood at the top of the steps, just smiling. Then on the ground was a wooden plank with long nails pointing up. The stranger jumped off the steps and landed right on those nails. They went right through his shoes and blood started to flow. The man's father stood there transfixed as the stranger started to laugh again while pointing at the man's father with his bony finger. They ran away again, and the man's father knew that it was the devil, and they were grateful to be able to escape. Number 3. Alex Bedsoe. Alex Bedsoe saw the devil in 1973 when they were 10 years old. Apparently, the devil was arrested and in a jail cell, so Alex went with a man named Tater to see it. Tater had a beat-up truck, and he had claimed to have shaken the devil's hand. When Andy got there, he saw the cell windows and only one cell had its lights on. He said, "I could only see the plaster ceiling, then a shadow moved across it. The shadow stopped, it was in the shape of a human head, except 2 small horns rose from it. Then suddenly the head was standing at the window, looking out into the night, looking, I was certain, right at me. I could only see it from the nose up, and because the light was behind it, I could make out no facial details. But the horn seemed to be jet black, and the hairless head was in fact a deep, dark red." The next day, people in the trailer park talked about nothing else. The county sheriff came to get him about 1 in the morning, but there wasn't nobody in the cell. Everybody figured it was some kind of joke played by the pastor. I never asked about that night, and as I grew older, I accepted that the suggestion hovering in the hot summer air had worked on my child's brain and conjured what I thought I'd seen, except for one thing. About a week afterwards, Hader started driving around in a new truck. I mean brand new, a 1975 Chevy Blazer with 4-wheel drive and a camper shell. Lots of people asked where he'd gotten the money for it, since otherwise his lifestyle didn't change. For me, the source of the new truck was plain as day, and the proof, it was painted red. Devil red. Number 2. Jennifer Perez. This is the testimony of a 15-year-old girl who was brought up in a Christian home. She strayed from that path, got into drugs, died, and was sent to hell. Fortunately, she was given a second chance, but this is her story. She was in the hospital and her spirit woke up, but her body didn't. As a spirit, two men dressed in red approached her and told her to come with them. She then went to heaven and saw the Lord and two angels, Gabriel and Michael. She and Gabriel went through a black door and it was dark and they were falling. The farther they fell, the hotter it was, and it smelled like sulfur. She was in hell, and she was seeing people being tortured by various demons. The cries and torture scared her. She then saw a massive red creature in the middle of it all that was just watching everything. She assumed that was the devil and it terrified her. She then ascended back to heaven and was asked for a second chance. She then woke up in the hospital, alive, and devoted her life to God. And coming in at number 1 is Sister Josefa Mendez. This young Spanish sister, who had a short religious life of great suffering, experienced revelations throughout much of her life. More than once, she was taken to hell to witness and feel the suffering firsthand. Sister Josefa was reluctant to write on the subject of hell, and did so only to conform to her Lord's wishes. She wrote about her experiences in her journal. Sister Josefa described it as the greatest torment of hell, namely was the soul's inability to love. She wrote, "One of these damned souls cried out, 'This is my torture, that I want to love and cannot. There's nothing left in me but hatred and despair. If one of us could so much as make a single act of love, but we cannot, we live on hatred." As mentioned, she went to hell multiple times, but one time she saw the devil. She wrote, "Souls were crying out and the devil answered. Insinuate yourselves by inducing carelessness in them, but keep in the background so that you are not found out. Tempt these others with ambition, to self-interest, to acquiring wealth without working, whether it be lawful or not." That entry was from February 3rd, 1923. She visited hell many times after that, but didn't report on seeing the devil again.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Led Zeppelin. Rock and roll and Satanism have long been connected in some people's eyes, so it's no wonder that legendary band Led Zeppelin has experienced some of these dark connections. Back in January of 1982, evangelical broadcaster Paul Crouch began accusing different rock artists of hiding messages in their songs through backmasking, and one example that he pointed out was the classic Zeppelin tune Stairway to Heaven. He directly pointed to a segment of the song where he claimed that when played in reverse, he was hearing the words, "Oh, here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He will give those with him 666. There was a little tool shed where he made us suffer, sad Satan." Since this accusation of satanic messages, this has definitely become one of the most famous instances of alleged backmasking, which has only added to the legacy of Zeppelin. In our number 9 spot today, we have Bob Dylan. Not necessarily who I expected to put on this list, but there was an interesting interview back in 2004 that made many people speculate that the musician might have sold his soul. In the interview, he was explaining that he owes his years of fame and success to a deal he made. The interviewer asked, "Why are you still out here?" To which Dylan replied, "It goes back to that destiny thing. I made a bargain with it, long time ago, and I'm holding up my end." The interviewer, of course, had to follow up on what that cryptic message was, so he asked, "What was your bargain?" Dylan replied, "To get where I am now." The interviewer asked, "Should I ask who you made the bargain with?" He replied, "With the chief commander." The interviewer clarified, "On this earth?" To which he answered, "In this earth and in a world we can't see." I can totally see why some people decided to draw their own conclusions from this. I mean, it sounds like he is basically speaking in riddles. While he doesn't outright say that he sold his soul, some believe that this is what he was trying to say in that interview. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ozzy Osbourne. One of the most famous rock stars ever, Ozzy has long been connected to the occult. I mean, Ozzy, Prince of Darkness, didn't just come from nowhere. Aside from the rumors, however, Ozzy has been fairly open about his personal connection to the devil. In a 1984 issue of Hit Parader, Ozzy said, quote, "I really wish I knew why I've done some of the things I've done over the years. Sometimes I think that I'm possessed by some outside spirit. A few years ago, I was convinced of that. I thought I truly was possessed by the devil. I remember sitting through The Exorcist a dozen times, saying to myself, yeah, I can relate to that. He even has expressed confusion over whether or not he's a medium for some kind of outside source, or if something much more sinister is at play. When speaking of actually selling his soul, well, Ozzy had some less than comforting things to say. He said, quote, "I already have. Well, you sell your soul to the devil when you do something yourself that you shouldn't, and I already have. I've lived my life to the fullest. If there's an afterlife, I've got a good spot in the furnace. You know?" I'll see you there, Ozzy. In our number 7 spot today, we have Jay-Z. Rapper Jay-Z has long had some interesting stories and conspiracies surrounding him, including his alleged connection to the Illuminati. You know, this secret society that conspiracy theorist claims possesses this crazy, unknowable power. People often make this connection with a lot of people in the rap and hip-hop industry, but it happens to Jay-Z often due to him referencing the devil multiple times in his music videos. I mean, especially in the song Lucifer. People also make connections to certain imagery shown in his music videos and even in his merch, or the things he wears himself as well, to things like the occult and Satan himself. Whether it's a pentagram, the all-seeing eye, or the phrase "do what thou wilt," it seems as though Jay-Z has some people in a satanic panic. In our number 6 spot today, we have Robert Johnson. Well known for being one of the most incredible guitar players of all time, Robert was one of those people that some members of the public simply just couldn't see how he was so talented, so of course that led to some extremely haunting rumors swirling about him. Some people claimed that he was only able to gain his talent through supernatural means, which many claimed was by way of the devil. Story goes that Robert headed to the crossroads where the devil took his guitar, tuned it, and showed him how to master the blues. Unfortunately, however, with this eerie tale comes a very tragic end. Some say that in exchange for his abilities, Robert had to offer the later half of his life. He exchanged much of his life in order to make this deal. Sadly, Robert would pass away at the exceptionally young age of 27. Many claim this was actually due to a poisoning made by a jealous man. Whatever the real story behind his life, talents, and tragic death, the legacy of Robert certainly lives on. He was an incredibly prolific musician who left behind quite the record collection. In our number 5 spot today, we have Niccolo Paganini. Niccolo was a professional violinist who was born in 1782. His parents began to send him to lessons when he was just 5 years old, and by age 15 he was already touring the world because he was so talented. What's interesting about Niccolo and his story, other than his obvious musical genius, however, is the rumors surrounding his talent and subsequent recognition. According to some, people believe that his own mother summoned the devil in order for her son to be the extreme talent that he was. There are many modern diagnoses that could potentially explain some of what made Niccolo so talented, and I mean, we all know quite well that sometimes people are just born with extreme talent, but of course, in the early 1800s, people and their imagination certainly ran wild. The final reason why people believe Niccolo may have made a deal with the devil is because shortly before his death, Niccolo was quite sick. The doctors had a feeling he was nearing death, so they sent in a priest to pray over him. When Niccolo first saw the priest, it is said that he freaked out and sent the priest away. Many people believe that him pushing the priest away was only a confirmation of the fact that he was working with the devil. In our number 4 spot today, we have Giuseppe Tartini. Okay, so this story is one that is kind of similar to Niccolo's, but even more strange. Giuseppe was an Italian violinist and composer who lived during the 1700s. He went on to compose a song called The Devil's Trill Sonata, and not only this, but he also claimed to wake up one night to find Satan sitting on the edge of his bed playing the violin. It seems as though the devil really likes violins, apparently. What's extremely curious is after this alleged encounter, it is said that Giuseppe's violin skills hit heights never seen before. He was able to suddenly play extremely complicated trills that are impossible for most musicians, and apparently even today the sonata is too difficult for many musicians to play, which is why people believe that perhaps this story really was true. In our number 3 spot today, we have Jack Parsons. Jack was a man who was born just a few weeks prior to the Wright brothers flying the first airplane, and being born at a time like this had him growing up dreaming of and reading sci-fi novels about rocket ships taking people to space. It is said that this love of rocket ships and these dreams of going to space are what led to him summoning the devil in order to make a deal. Jack wanted to sell his soul in exchange for a rocket ship. This deal didn't end up working, but Jack continued to study science as as he grew older. Later in life, he stumbled upon the teachings of Aleister Crowley and tried his hand at summoning things again. This time he tried to summon a goddess by the name of Babylon that was said to possibly help men get to the moon one day. Technically, in some ways, it worked, because Jack Parsons ended up helping create the jet fuel that is said to still be used today. Maybe it was his original deal with the devil, maybe it was the goddess, or maybe it was just good old passion and drive that did it. Guess that all depends on what you believe. In our number 2 spot today, we have Christoph Heisman. Back in 1677, Christoph was an artist who was working on a castle in Austria. He was so talented at his job that he had been commissioned by the nobles to do this work. There were rumblings about how he may have sold his soul to the devil, but no one was sure of it until it was said that Christoph confessed. He said he had 9 years prior and that he regretted it very much now and actually wanted an exorcism. They demanded to know if he was a practicing witch, but in the end it was decided that he was not, and that instead the devil just had a very strong hold on him. The local priest began giving Christoph exorcisms, and during these sessions, Christoph explained that he had these intense visions where he was coming face to face with the devil, who was in the form of a dragon. The dragon was holding the contract that held Christoph's soul, and this is when he was able to rip it out of the dragon's talons. When he woke up, it seemed as though he was cured. After this, he began painting pictures of the devil, and he even painted a story with multiple panels that told the story of how he sold his soul and how they helped him to get it back. In our number 1 spot today, we have Antoine Rose. This woman from the 15th century is often credited with our modern day image of a witch riding a broomstick. She became known as the Witch of Savoy, and she is said to have confessed to regularly meeting with the devil. I mean, let's be honest, history doesn't exactly have a good record with those accused of witchcraft, so it isn't quite clear if this deal with the devil was real, or if perhaps Antoine could just add 1 + 1 and then suddenly she was accused of being a witch and had to find a way to try and defend herself. Legend goes that she was in a position where she was in dire need of money, and when she asked her neighbors for help, they led her to a group of people who convinced her to ask the devil for help. When the devil appeared, he agreed to help, of course, in exchange for her rejection of God and her promise to worship him. Story has it that she said the devil had a low, raspy voice when he appeared to her in human form, and she also apparently said that she was quite afraid of him. Can we really blame her?
Number 10, the violinist. It's been long said that successful artists have made a deal with the devil, and this has been going on for hundreds of years. An Italian violinist named Giuseppe Tartini claimed the devil appeared to him in a dream and played for him the most incredible piece of music he had ever heard. Here is how he described the experience. One night in the year 1713, I dreamed I had made a pact with the devil for my soul. Everything went as I wished. My new servant anticipated my every desire. Among other things, I gave him my violin to see if he could play. How great was my astonishment on hearing a sonata so wonderful and so beautiful, played with such great art and intelligence as I had ever even conceived in my boldest flights of fantasy. Upon waking, Giuseppe tried to recreate it, and that became his magnum opus, known as the Devil's Trill Sonata. Number 9, exorcism gone wrong. In 1997, Father Gabriel Amorth conducted his exorcisms in Rome, and he asked for the help of Jesus, and the young man he was dealing with began to curse and spit, and started using English instead of his native Italian. Screaming and howling, the demon burst forth and looked straight at him, drooling saliva from the young man's mouth. Father Gabriel said he returned fire with prayers and other ritual recitations, demanding that the demon reveal its name. He said, "Unclean spirit, whoever you are and all your companions who possess this servant of God, I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." The man fixed him with a glare, snarled, and said, "I am Lucifer." Father Gabriel was shocked. He did not expect to receive such a terrifying response. The father mostly used prayers as his weapon, reciting verses of liberation from the Roman rite of exorcism. As Father Gabriel continually commanded the demon to leave the host, it eventually left, but my goodness, that sounds absolutely terrifying. Number 8, witch trials. Sarah Good was one of the first 3 women to be accused of witchcraft witchcraft in the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692 in Massachusetts. On March 25, 1692, Sarah was tried for witchcraft, and when she was brought in, the accusers immediately began to rock back and forth and moan, seemingly in response to Sarah's presence. Later in the trial, one of the accusers fell into a fit. Now, Sarah denied the allegations against her, but another woman on trial admitted to being the devil's servant. She stated that a tall man dressed in all black came to them, demanding they sign their names in a great book. Although initially refusing, she eventually wrote her name after Sarah, and another woman forced her to. When Sarah was allowed the chance to defend herself in front of the 12 jurors in the Salem Village Meeting House, she argued her innocence, proclaiming that the other two were the real witches. In the end, however, Sarah was convicted of witchcraft and sentenced to death. So, did she really meet the devil, or was she innocent? Who knows? Number 7. Strayed from the path. This is the testimony of Jennifer Perez, who was brought up in a Christian home. She strayed from that path, got into drugs, died, and was sent to hell. Fortunately, she was given a second chance, but this is her story. She was in the hospital and her spirit woke up, but her body didn't. As a spirit, 2 men dressed in red approached her and told her to come with them. She went to heaven and saw the Lord and 2 angels, Gabriel and Michael. She and Gabriel went through a black door and it was dark and they were falling. The farther they fell, the hotter it was, and she said it smelled like sulfur. They got to the bottom and she realized that she was in hell, seeing people being tortured by various demons. The cries and torture scared her, and then she saw a massive red creature in the middle of it all, just watching everything. She assumed that this was the devil, and it terrified her. After this, she then ascended back to heaven and was asked for a second chance. She then woke up in the hospital, alive, and devoted the rest of her life to God. Number 6. Mom met the devil. A user on Reddit posted this story about the time their mother met the devil. They said, "My mom told me a story of when she met the devil. She was in high school, she had a friend who was dating an older man. He was probably 20 to 30 years older than her, and he gave her a necklace. Not wanting to get caught by her parents, she gave the necklace to my mom. She wore it, and that night when my mom slept, she dreamt of a man. Clean cut and handsome, but disturbingly evil. She said all she knew about the man was that he was pure evil. He came up to her face, eyes locked on her, stone cold and expressionless, reached for her neck and grabbed the necklace from her neck and twirled it in a circle in the air like a witch's pendant. She jolted awake and couldn't feel the necklace, and in a panic she looked all around for the necklace and found it under her pillow in a perfect spiral." Number 5. TikTok doctor. Once, a man who was pronounced dead by his doctor after being injured said that rather than seeing a bright light and the feeling of coming home, he instead saw hell itself and met the devil. A doctor took to TikTok to explain that he encountered a young man in his early 20s who had been stabbed in the heart after being involved in a deal that went wrong. Not willing to let the man die, medical staff took the victim into surgery, kept him from losing too much blood, and treated the wound in his heart. The doctor remembers the man waking up 4 hours later and crying, claiming that he went straight down to hell and looked straight in the eyes of the devil. The man said he could see the doctors working to save his life, and having never prayed before, gave it a try, at which point an angel pulled him back up out of hell. Remembering how clear the man had been, the doctor said it was the most amazing experience because he was legit. I mean, nobody makes up an experience like that. The last I heard, he's completely changed his life, he gave his life to God, and I still to this day, the look in his eyes when he woke up, the terror, I'm absolutely convinced he did meet the devil. Number 4. Working for the devil. Gilles de Rais was originally hailed a hero of France for his role in the 100 Years' War, a time during which he served as a comrade in arms to Joan of Arc, but the nobleman Gilles de Rais lived a secret, gruesome second life where he enjoyed ending the lives of people who couldn't defend themselves. In September 1440, de Rais was arrested after an almost decade-long spree in which he may have ended the lives of over 140 victims. During his trial, both de Rais and several of his servants/accomplices confessed to their evil deeds. Besides ending people's lives, he also admitted to engaging in Satanism by reportedly summoning the devil and his demonic minions. While the nobleman refused to sell his soul, he offered the blood and organs of his victims in exchange for knowledge and power power over the dark arts. Number 3. God wanted her to see hell. Josefa Menendez was a young Spanish sister who had a short religious life of great suffering and experienced many revelations throughout her life. More than once she was taken to hell to witness and feel the suffering firsthand. Sister Josefa was reluctant to write on the subject of hell, and did so only to conform to her Lord's wishes. She wrote about her experiences in her journal, and she described it as the greatest torment of hell, namely the soul's inability to love. She wrote, "One of these damned souls cried out, 'This is my torture, that I want to love and cannot. There is nothing left me but hatred and despair. If one of us could so much as make a single act of love, but we cannot, we live on hatred." As mentioned, she went to hell multiple times, but one time she saw the devil. She wrote, "Souls were crying out and the devil answered, 'Insinuate yourselves by including carelessness in them, but keep in the background so that you are not found out. Tempt these others into ambition, into self-interest, to acquiring wealth without working, whether it be lawful or not." That entry was from February 3rd, 1923. She visited hell many times after that, but didn't report on seeing the devil again. And that sounds absolutely terrifying. Number 2. In a coma. Will Carroll is a drummer who has been in the band Death Angel since 2009 and has provided the drum tracks for their last 4 studio albums. After spending nearly 2 weeks in a coma fighting Will revealed that during his battle with the virus, he saw the afterlife, where he would be sent to hell and meet Satan. The illness left him in a critical state where he was put on a ventilator while lying unconscious in a California Pacific Medical Center hospital bed for 12 days before recovering. He said that the devil would punish him for the deadly sin of sloth. The musician said Satan would transform him into a creature similar to that of Star Wars' Jabba the Hutt, and that he would vomit blood until he ultimately had a heart attack. Will told the San Francisco Chronicle that what he went through allowed him to change some of his typical lifestyle habits, including his once heavy alcohol and illegal substance use. "I'm also going to listen to satanic metal though," he joked, but he later admitted that after beating COVID-19, he doesn't think Satan's quite as cool as he used to. And coming up at number 1, The Devil Made Me Do It. Sound familiar? It's because the third Conjuring movie has the same title. This film is inspired by the real events that took place with Arnie Johnson. Ed and Lorraine Warren were helping exorcise a possessed boy named David Glatzel in the early 80s. David's family had seen him being beaten and choked by invisible hands, and that red marks had appeared on his neck afterwards. David had started to growl, hiss, speak in otherworldly voices, and recite passages from the Bible as well. They did many exorcisms on David, and Lorraine said that David levitated, ceased breathing for a time, and even demonstrated the supernatural ability of precognition. During his exorcisms, there was also a rocking chair in the room that would allegedly rock on its own, levitate, and even vanish and reappear. David and Lorraine also claimed to have seen the devil sitting in it. Arnie then coerced one of the demons to possess him while participating in one of David's exorcisms. Afterwards, Arnie's personality changed. He would fall into a trance-like state where he would growl and hallucinate, but later have no memory of it. Then one day, his and his girlfriend's Debbie's landlord was drunk and misbehaving, so Ernie ended his life. The day after the incident, Lorraine Warren informed the Brookfield police that Ernie was possessed when the crime was committed. The case then went on to trial, where Ernie's defense was demonic possession and the devil made me do it. The jury deliberated for 15 hours over 3 days before convicting Ernie of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, though he only served 5.
Starting us off at number 10 is Caligula. Caligula's reign began in 37 AD, and for the first 6 months he was actually regarded as a fairly moderate and noble leader. Early on, he freed citizens who'd been unjustly imprisoned and got rid of stiff sales tax, which are both things that will get a good amount of people on your side. But somewhere around that 6-month mark, everything changed. And I mean everything. According to records, Caligula fell ill and was never the same again. Soon he became known as a tyrant, killing whomever he pleased for the fun of it, declared himself a living god, began harassing and having his way with any women he pleased, including his own sisters, whom he was also selling off to other men. Contemporaries wrote of his blatant disregard for humanity and his people, saying how he used money to fund his own personal estate rather than feed the starving. And according to one account, once at some games he was presiding, he was said to have ordered his guards to throw an entire section of the audience into the arena during the intermission to be eaten by the wild beasts because there were no prisoners to be used and he was bored. Could this sudden change in personality have been some sort of deal with the devil? I guess we'll never know. Coming in at number 9, Timur. Founder of the Timurid Empire in what is now a mixture of modern-day Afghanistan, Iraq, and Central Asia, Timur was an undefeated military commander who reigned from 1370 to 1405. Now, although he is regarded as one of the greatest military leaders in history, he was also incredibly brutal to his enemies. So depending on who it is you are talking to, there are a couple of different opinions on just how great of a guy he was. For example, in present-day Afghanistan, he ordered the construction of a tower made out of live men, each stacked on top of one another and cemented together with bricks and mortar. Another instance of brutality was when he ordered a rebellion be punished and 70,000 heads of the rebels were built up into a minaret. So you definitely did not want to be on his bad side, let's just say that. However, the part that has made some people wonder if he danced with the devil to acquire all that power came when his tomb was exhumed in 1941, and allegedly the phrase, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble," was inscribed into his tomb. Additionally, inside the casket, another inscription read, "Whomever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Coming in at number 8, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Born in 1560 into the Bathory family of Hungary, Elizabeth was a noblewoman who was a lot less noble than her title suggests. Famously nicknamed the Bloody Countess, Elizabeth, along with 4 of her servants, became a rather notorious figure after it was revealed she had been luring young virgin peasant women into her castle, promising them a job and a better life, before instead brutally harming them to their deaths. According to texts, her devious methods included sticking needles under their fingernails, covering girls in honey before unleashing bees on them, and biting off chunks of their flesh. But it was said no matter what, with each victim she always bathed in their blood. And while the actual number of victims is up for debate, there are some accounts that believe the number could have been as high as 600. Now, as far as her intentions behind the killings were concerned, in some circles it was rumored she was a vampire, while others believed she was hunting down those she suspected to be witches. But some think it was some kind of deal she made with the devil to stay young and beautiful forever. In the end, the craziest part of the whole ordeal was that she never really had to face the music for her crimes. She simply lived out the rest of her life on house arrest, roaming freely around her castle. Coming in at number 7, Vlad the Impaler. Born in 1431, Vlad was the son of Vlad Dracul, ruler of Wallachia, and became the leader himself in 1448 after being imprisoned by the Ottoman Empire. While many saw him as a hero, his unmatched cruelty and penchant for barbaric executions, often against his own people, contributed to his reputation as one of history's most cold-blooded leaders. Vlad was known to perform disembowelment, beheading, and even skinning or boiling his victims alive. Still, his preferred method was impalement, as his nickname hints at. After one famous military victory against the Ottoman Turks, Vlad supposedly had around 20,000 men impaled on the banks of the Danube. When the second wave of invaders arrived, they are said to have immediately retreated upon seeing the grotesque forest of corpses. According to some accounts, Vlad also enjoyed dining among the thousands of impaled bodies and would even dip his bread into the blood of his victims. Coming in at number 6, Dr. Sigmund Rascher. There were many evil scientists researching cruel experiments during World War II, and one of the worst doctors of the time was Dr. Sigmund Rascher. When he joined the army, he asked the leader if human subjects could be provided at his disposal, and by 1942, his wishes were granted. He began conducting experiments in in pressure chambers where he would simulate a high altitude and then quickly alter the pressure to simulate the conditions of a pilot free falling with no oxygen. But he was most well known for his cruel freezing experiments on 300 prisoners, supposedly to figure out the best way to warm up soldiers who experienced hypothermia. To do so, he would either force his victims to remain outdoors, completely naked in freezing temperatures for up to 14 hours, or would place them in tanks of ice water for 3 hours, measuring their pulse and internal temperatures all the while. From there, he would warm up the victims, experimenting with a variety of different temperatures, including boiling water, often causing further harm. Along with his freezing experiments, Sigmund would administer polygol, a substance to aid blood clotting, and then shoot or amputate a limb on his victims to see the speed at which they would bleed out. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to imagine a deal with the devil in his case. Coming in at number 5, Warren Jeffs. Although now he's in prison serving a life sentence for his crimes, members of the FLDS still consider Jeffs the leader and prophet, believing he was wrongly convicted, which is insane if you know the backstory. So the FLDS, or Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is an extreme denomination of the Mormon Church that separates itself entirely from secular life. Their belief is that in order to get into the highest rank of heaven, you must have at least 3 wives. But realistically, the more you have, the better in their eyes. Now, there is a lot to unpack with this entire denomination. Honestly, I could write a whole video on it alone. But essentially, under Warren Jeffs' leadership, the FLDS came under fire as a hate group and a funnel for underage marriages. Prior to his arrest, it was believed that Warren had 87 wives, many of which were not of legal age to marry, and he was not the only one to be in a similar situation. Using the excuse that it was God's will, he routinely married off young teenage girls with very old men, and even created a temple to have his way with any girl he pleased. Ironically, while this was happening, he was sneaking off the commune to gamble, pay for sexual services, and romp around the secular world, living the life he preached was sinful, while committing actual sins in his own community. Coming in at number 4, Jim Jones. If you've ever heard of the term drinking the Kool-Aid, this man is why. Growing up, Jones's life was hard. His father was a disabled war vet in and out of hospital, and his mother was all-round neglectful. So Jones was pretty much left to his own devices. Looking for a family, he began to develop a community at his local church, but sadly, it turned into a much darker obsession. He began to study and idealize fascist leaders and dreamed of becoming a preacher just like them. As an adult, he worked as a minister and began claiming to have psychic and healing powers until eventually he started his own religion, the People's. Sadly, he became drunk on power, and the next thing you know, he was calling himself a prophet and began hoarding the cult members' money for his own gain. By 1977, he immigrated the commune to Guyana and called it Jonestown. But a congressman named Ryan was onto him and went to investigate allegations of human rights abuse. The congressman ended up taking members from the cult who wanted to leave, but Jones did not take kindly to this and ordered his henchmen kill Ryan and his party. But after he got word that not everyone was taken out, he worried the military would come and shut down his entire operation. So he ordered all members take their own lives as an act of revolution. Tragically, all 909 members were forced to take their own life with a mix of flavor aid and cyanide, and those that didn't go down willingly were given an injection. Coming in at number 3, Idi Amin. Once the president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979, Idi Amin was and still is regarded as one of the most brutal despots in modern world history. Prior to his reign over the country, Amin was the commander of the Ugandan army, but as one might have guessed, he was not really following all the rules. In fact, the president at the time, Milton Obote, was actually planning to arrest Amin Amen for misuse of army funding. However, somehow this news made its way back to Amen, and he hatched a plan to overthrow the elected government via a military coup and declare himself the president. Unfortunately, this plan worked. Under his malicious reign, his first order of business was to expel the entirety of the Asian population, which was roughly 80,000 people, many of whom were dual citizens. This complete intolerance and persecution of any and all ethnic groups continued under his dictatorship, along with rampant human rights abuses, political repression, and extrajudicial killing. In fact, it's estimated that nearly 300,000 civilians lost their lives in the mere 8 years he ruled over the country. Finally, in 1979, the Tanzanian president ordered his troops to capture him, which they did, ousting him from his power. But rather than face his charges, Amen went into exile in Saudi Arabia, where he remained until his death. Coming in at number 2, King Leopold II. The King of Belgium from 1865 to 1909. In Belgium, he is often referred to as the Builder King, as he commissioned a great number of buildings, urban projects, and public works. But he also has another, not so flattering title, the Butcher of Congo. You see, as was unfortunately all too common at the time, King Leopold, with the help of other colonial European nations, claimed Congo for himself and began extracting the natural resources for his own gain. Initially, he was after ivory, but soon he discovered it was ripe with rubber, and so he ordered the native population into forced labor to harvest and process it for him. Not only that, but if the quotas were not met by his slaves, he would hurt, kill, and even amputate the hands of anyone he pleased to send a message. Ironically, he never set foot in the Congo, yet he was responsible for an estimated 10 million deaths. Eventually, word got out of his atrocities after African-American politician and historian George Washington Williams visited the land and wrote an open letter describing the practices as crimes against humanity, and the outside pressure forced him to sell the land. And last up in our number 1 spot, Pol Pot. Leader of the notoriously cruel communist movement Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979, Pol Pot is among some of the most evil leaders in history. During his short but radical rule, the entire country was isolated from all foreign influences. This included closing schools, hospitals, factories, banks, and foreign agriculture, as they believed this would stimulate the rebirth of the country. But of course, all it did was send it into a desolate famine and poverty. The population was forcibly moved to the countryside, where they were ordered to work on collective farms, but with the economy collapsing, people in the country were starving. Still, they could not forage for food. In fact, anyone who disobeyed the orders were killed. Well, actually, anyone who was educated or spoke an opposing thought was killed. And in just 4 years, nearly 2 million Cambodians of all ages perished, which was approximately 1/4 of the population. To give you just an idea of the kind of evil this man was capable of, one of the most disgusting practices that took place during his genocidal tyranny was what happened at the Chankiri trees in the killing fields. Innocent sons and daughters whose parents had been killed for a crime against the state were taken to the trees and executed so they could not, and I quote, grow up and take revenge for their parents' deaths. He truly was an evil, evil man.
And we're starting things off with David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam. One peculiar aspect of his case was his claim that his neighbor's dog was possessed and instructed him to commit violent acts. In the mid-1970s, Berkowitz carried out a string of shootings. He was eventually arrested in 1977, and during the investigation, he admitted to the shootings and claimed that his neighbor's dog, a black Labrador retriever named Harvey, was possessed by a demon. According to Berkowitz, Harvey commanded him to take the lives of people. Berkowitz later asserted that he had started the fires in the Bronx, attributing this act to the dog's influence as well. In 1978, Berkowitz pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in prison. He later renounced his satanic beliefs and became involved in prison ministry, offering counseling and support to other inmates. And at number 9, we have Sean Sellers. He was a self-proclaimed Satanist who claimed to be possessed by a demon named Azaret. In 1985, at the age of 16, Sellers took the lives of his parents, Vonda and Paul, in their Oklahoma home. He later confessed to these acts, as well as having shot a convenience store clerk a year prior who refused to sell him beer. Sellers stated that his involvement in Satanism influenced his actions. According to Sellers, he believed he was possessed by the demon, which drove him to commit the violent acts. And Sellers was eventually arrested, tried, and convicted for the crimes. He was sentenced to death in 1986, and during his time on death row, he became a born-again Christian and renounced his previous involvement in Satanism, but despite his change in beliefs and multiple appeals, Sellers was executed by lethal injection in 1999. Next up is Manuela and Daniel Ruda, two lovers bound together by their passion for violence in the name of the Dark Lord. How romantic. Manuela and Daniel Ruda were a German couple involved in a highly disturbing incident in 2001. They were responsible for the death of Frank Hackert, and their reason for taking their friend's life? Well, according to the couple at the time, they thought he was so funny and would be the perfect court jester for Satan. The Rudas were deeply immersed in occult practices, spending time vacationing in England and Scotland, sleeping in graveyards, and going to devil-worshipping parties. The couple subjected Hackert to hours of violent rituals, which tragically led to his demise. After taking Hackert's life, they stuck his body in a coffin that they used as a coffee table. They attempted to dismember his body, but they were apprehended before they could dispose of the remains. They were actually caught in a gas station, and apparently they were brandishing chainsaws, like waiting for the authorities to arrive. Very insane. In 2002, they were both convicted of the crime, with Daniel receiving a prison sentence and Manuela being committed to a psychiatric institution because of her diminished mental state. She cut her ties with Daniel when he was in prison, though, and he landed himself in court once again years later when he apparently attempted to hire a hitman to take her out. True love at its finest. As insane as all this is, using a coffin for a coffee table, that is actually an awesome idea. I am taking note of that. Nikolai Ogobliak. This next case happened in 2008 in Russia. It's pretty disturbing. Nikolai was a former choir boy turned Satanist and led a small cult of Satan worshippers. He and a few of his underlings lured 4 teenagers in the local goth scene into the woods, about 300 miles northeast of Moscow, where they forced them to drink alcohol before stabbing them 666 times each. After that, they ate parts of their victims' bodies. The group was arrested when various body parts were found in Nikolai's apartment complex. One member was quoted saying, "Satan will help me avoid responsibility. I made many sacrifices to him." Another said, "I tried to turn to God, but it didn't bring me any money. I prayed to Satan and things improved." It didn't improve that much because now you're in prison, but yeah. Number 6, the Beasts of Satan. The members of the Beasts of Satan were primarily young individuals in the metal scene in Soma, Lombardo, Italy. They shared an interest in Satanism and the occult, and they believed in ritualistic practices influenced by the darker aspects of satanic worship. One night in January of 1998, after hanging out at Midnight Pub listening to heavy metal music, 3 members, Andrea Volpe, Nicola Sapone, and Mario Muccione, lured 2 of their friends out into the woods and took their lives in a ritualistic sacrifice. They buried their bodies in the woods and then danced on their graves, chanting, "Now you're both zombies. Try to get out of this hole if you dare." Might have sounded catchier in Italian. The group got away with this initially. Authorities didn't look into the 2 teens' disappearances because they were a couple, and police were like, "Oh yeah, they probably ran off together." Great policing work. Then in 2004, the group's leader, Andre Volpe, took the life of his ex-girlfriend, believing she knew too much about the incident from 7 years prior. Then he and his buddy buried the body before taking a large amount of drugs, crashing their car into a tree. The 2 were arrested, and during interrogations, everything came out. Next on the list is Ricky Queso. In 1984, Ricky Queso, a teenager from Northport, New York, took the life of his friend Gary Lowers. On June 16th, 1984, Queso and a group of friends, who were all part of a group they called the Knights of the Black Circle, lured Lowers to a remote wooded area. There, a confrontation confrontation ensued, during which Queso and his accomplices subjected Lauwers to a drawn-out beating. Queso apparently tried to force Lauwers into praising Satan. Lauwers refused, though, repeating that he loved his mother. The entire group was high on psychedelic drugs at the time. Queso would then brag about the incident to his friends days afterwards, claiming that Satan had appeared to him in the form of a black crow. When it cawed, he interpreted it as Satan giving his approval of the attack. This was at the height of the satanic panic in the US, and Queso's fascination with satanic rituals and the occult, and the fact that he was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt when he was arrested, it all became the focal point in the media coverage of the case. And shortly after the incident, Queso was arrested and charged in connection with Lauwers' demise. And before he could stand trial, though, he took his own life in his jail cell on July 7th of 84. Number 4, the Ripper Crew. The Ripper Crew was a notorious satanic cult active in Chicago during the 80s, comprising of 4 members: Robert Gett, Edward Spreitzer, and brothers Andrew and Thomas Cocoreles. They carried out a series of heinous crimes, abducting and taking the lives of several women in the area. They followed this twisted version of Satanism, using it as a justification for their violent acts. Their leader, Robin Gett, allegedly believed that offering human sacrifices to Satan, he would then gain supernatural powers and protection. The Ripper Crew targeted young women. They abducted their victims, subjected them to brutal torment, and then took their lives as part of their ritualistic practices. In 82, the police arrested Robin Gett. During his interrogation, he confessed to several crimes and provided information about the cult's activities, and this led to the arrest and conviction of the other members, including Edward Spreitzer and the Cocoreles brothers. But it's essential to, I want to say, their actions aren't really representative of mainstream Satanism. I think that this goes for everyone on this list. In real life, Satanism really is not about promoting violence. Anyway, in 83, Robin Gett was sentenced to 120 years in prison. Edward Spreitzer and Andrew Cocoreles were sentenced to death, with Spreitzer later receiving a life sentence after Illinois temporarily banned the death penalty, and Thomas Cocoreles was actually released from prison in 2019 for some reason. Next on the list, we have Krista Pike. In January 1995, Krista Gale Pike, who was 18 at the time, along with 2 accomplices, Shadola Peterson and Tadariel Ship, Pike's boyfriend, were involved in a gruesome incident that claimed the life of classmate Colleen Slemmer. Pike had a disturbing interest in Satanism and the occult, and carried out the act in a particularly disturbing manner. So it all started when Slemmer seemed to be talking to her boyfriend a little too much for Krista's liking, so she formed a plan with Ship and Peterson to take Slemmer out of the picture. The trio lured Slemmer to a vacant steam plant where they violently attacked her. They beat her for 30 minutes, cut her up, even carved a pentagram into her chest. In 1996, Krista Pike was convicted of her role in the event, and despite her young age, was sentenced to death. She's currently still on death row. Number 2, Richard Ramirez, or as he became known, the Night Stalker, one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Ramirez was heavily influenced by Satanism, and he often left satanic symbols at the scenes of his crimes. He was known to draw pentagrams on the walls and leave occult objects behind. Ramirez believed that he was protected by dark forces and that Satan guided his actions. During 84 and 85, Ramirez took the lives of at least 13 people in Southern California. His victims, ranging in age from 9 to 83, were subjected to brutal attacks, and in some cases, he would also burglarize the people's homes. He would also force many of his victims to profess their love for Satan. Unlike a lot of criminals of his kind who typically have a specific pattern to the types of people they'll victimize, Ramirez was more unpredictable. His victims were almost entirely random. Men, women, young, old, didn't matter to him. Now, the way this all ends is probably the most cathartic I've heard in any notorious criminal case like this. In 1985, Ramirez was chased down by residents in East Los Angeles after they recognized him from news coverage. An angry mob formed, and Ramirez was just romped on until police showed up. It's like the ending of Frankenstein or something, only Ramirez actually deserved what he got. He was then arrested, tried, and convicted. He died in 2013 while on death row in San Quentin. And finally, we have Adolfo Constanzo. This guy was a cult leader, a drug trafficker, and he also practiced black magic. Man was just looking at the villain menu Was like, yep, I'll have that. I'll take that. Might as well check that off as well. He was the mastermind behind a criminal organization involved in drug trafficking, and he would take victims' lives in these spooky, dark rituals. He believed that performing human sacrifices would grant him supernatural powers and protect his drug trafficking operations. Cult members followed his twisted beliefs without question, basically the definition of a cult. The cult's rituals often involved human sacrifice. Victims were often abducted or lured and then died in ceremonies aimed at appeasing deities and spirits. Their bodies were dismembered and body parts were used in the rituals. In 1989, Constanzo's criminal activities began to unravel when Mexican authorities discovered the cult's headquarters in Matamoros, Mexico, and there they found evidence of the cult's rituals, including human remains and ritualistic artifacts. There's this big witches type cauldron with a dead black cat and a human brain inside of it. Doesn't seem real. Constanzo and 4 of his followers fled, but were eventually tracked down by the police, and Constanzo didn't want to be taken alive, and so he ordered one of his followers to shoot him, and that was the end of that.
Coming in at number 10 is Herman the Recluse. The Codex Gigas was published in the early 13th century and is written by Herman the Recluse, a monk who broke his monastic vow and was sentenced to be walled up alive. Now, in order to try and escape his dire fate, he promised to write a book that would glorify the monastery forever, a book that contained the entire knowledge of the universe. Now, Herman the Recluse was given one try to complete the book, and if he hadn't finished it by dawn, the sentence would be executed. Realizing by midnight that the task was impossible, Herman turned to the devil, who helped him finish the book for the price of his soul. Now, this book is also referred to as the Devil's Bible due to a fully colored portrait of Satan taking up a whole page. And when I say whole page, I mean a full 36-inch page. Now, the page next to the illustration contains a full description of the kingdom of heaven, and some say that Satan's portrait is his own signature, and others believe that Herman drew the portrait himself as a thanks. Oliver Cromwell. In 1651, on the eve of the Battle of Worcester, Oliver Cromwell allegedly met the devil in the woods. An alleged account by Colonel Lindsay, first captain of Oliver Cromwell's own regiment, described how he was taken with Oliver himself into the woods to meet a grave elderly man with a roll of parchment in his hand. This man filled Lindsay with an uncontrollable horror and trembling as he realized who this visitor really was. The aged unknown promised Oliver to have his will then and all things else for 7 years, at which date it would be his, the devil's, turn to complete mastery over Oliver's soul and body. According to the tale, Oliver had argued with the devil over the short span, expecting 21 years. After the bargain was made, Oliver was reputed and have cried out joyously to the colonel, "Now, Lindsay, the battle is our own. I long to be engaged." And with remarkable precision, the leader of England's only experiment in Republican government died exactly 7 years later amid terrible storms in September 1658. Psychic. A user online detailed their experience they had with the devil. They said, "A few years ago, I joined a psychic development class. We would hold seances and communicate with dead relatives. I didn't realize that opening myself up to the spirit world would mean communication with dark forces as well as light. For a period of a few weeks, I'd been having strange dreams. I decided to finally hold a seance myself and see who was trying to get in touch with me, and that's when he showed up, Satan. We communicated telepathically for at least half an hour. He said a lot of things I wasn't expecting. He told me God had forsaken our planet, and that's why so many bad things were happening. He said he was disgusted with some of the things happening right now, war, poverty, etc., and was angry that God allowed it to happen. He actually said that he loved humanity and was misunderstood. He wasn't the devil the Bible was talking about. The strangest thing was his appearance. It was not frightening or demonic. To me, he appeared as a young man, no older than 20. He was what most women would consider handsome, around 5'7" and an average build, blonde brown hair and piercing blue-gray eyes. He showed little emotion and was quite factual in the way he spoke. He came across as intelligent, sophisticated, and wise. He had gigantic wings and was surrounded by bright light, almost a completely white aura that radiated out by a few feet. As he appeared, I could hear the most heavenly voices speaking and and singing. He was able to mention and recite Bible verses I'd never even heard of or read. Above all else, he did not like to be referred to as the devil. He wants to be known as an archangel and believes that humanity seriously misunderstands him and the spirit world altogether. Number 7. Father Urbain Grandier. In 1632 in Leuton, France, a number of nuns accused Father Urbain Grandier, a Catholic priest, of bewitching them and sending a league of demons to commit vile acts with them. They even had the names of the demons. Now, a trial was quickly conducted by the church and the priest was questioned. During the trial, he was accused of having sexual relationships with many women, and then a document was produced in front of the judges, which was allegedly the contract that Urbain had made with the devil. It had not only the signature of Urbain, but also the signature of several demons, including the devil himself. The contract was written backwards in Latin and translated to the following: "We, the influential Lucifer, the young Satan, Beelzebub, Leviathan, Elmi, and Astaroth, together with others, have today accepted the covenant pact of Urbain Grandier, who is ours. And him do we promise the love of women, the flower of virgins, and respect of monarchs, honors, lusts, and powers. He will go whoring 3 days long. The carousel will be dear to him. He offers us once in the year a seal of blood. Under the feet he will trample the holy things of the church, and he will ask us many questions. With this pact, he will live 20 years happy on the earth of men, and will later join us to sin against God, bound in hell in the council of demons." Now, due to this, Father Urbain Grandier was later burned at the stake for charges of witchcraft. Number 6. Several meetings. When asked if anyone had ever met the devil, this online user said, "Yes, several times. Meeting and talking with him is not very pleasant. He has a very cold presence. He spoke always with a hint of disdain, like he was constantly mocking. I think I only saw him once where he was being candid, and then I'm probably wrong, and he only wanted me to think that. Either way, it was not my idea of fun to be sitting in the same room with a serious Satan. Now that I think back, I wonder if he puts up a comic front to try to get you to think that he isn't as grim as a person as he really is, using humor as an illusion for warmth. He is definitely a master of distraction and deception, and it can be confusing to talk with him, and I wouldn't recommend trying. Overall, it wasn't the happiest of circumstances I found myself in. Number 5. Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was an American blues musician from the early 20th century who, as legend has it, acquired his musical powers from a midnight deal with the devil. Born in 1911, Robert grew up alongside the Mississippi Delta. As a young man, he yearned for musical greatness and one night took his guitar to the crossroads in hopes of conjuring dark forces. The devil appeared and took Robert's guitar, played a few songs, and then handed it back, granting the young musician complete mastery of the instrument. The story thus explained Robert's extraordinary skill. It also led to rumors that Robert's drooping eye spoke of an infernal connection, and that he turned away from his audience while performing to hide the presence of evil. Now, Robert did very little to discourage these stories. If anything, he played into it with lyrics such as, "Early this morning when you knocked upon my door, and I said, 'Hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go.'" Now, in 1938, he died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 27. Some say he succumbed to syphilis, others poisoning, whereas others contended it was the devil himself collecting his due. 4. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. In the 1500s, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa was a scholar who devoted his life to writing about the occult. In his books, he mentioned the devil a lot and breaks down exactly how witches perform magic spells. You may be wondering how exactly he got all his information, and well, he claimed that when he was a young man, he gave in to the temptations of the devil and learned how to perform magic by following around groups of witches. He apparently then found Jesus and managed to save his own soul. He wrote his books in order to teach others to keep the devil at bay. During his lifetime, he published 8 huge books about the occult. Even though he was so public about being friends with the devil, he was never put to death for witchcraft. Perhaps he was seen as publishing such valuable information on how to battle the devil, they just wanted to keep him alive to learn more. While it would seem that he would have been promoting witch hunts in the church, he actually pushed for people to be more sympathetic and understanding. He wanted to try to help save them from the devil's grasp and have God save them through prayer, rather than burning them at the stake. lifesaver. Another online user had this to say when it came to meeting the devil. It actually wasn't that scary, he actually saved my life. I was being attacked by a bunch of demons and he literally snapped his fingers and blew them up. I can't get him to go away now. Everywhere I look, he is there, but not in a threatening way. More like a guardian angel way. I prefer his brother Gabriel though because he is very funny. I'm not kidding. He is sitting next to me right now. I know it must seem like I'm crazy or something or just making fun of the question, but I'm not. I'm being dead serious. John Fian. John Fian was a doctor and school teacher who was declared as a notorious sorcerer. He confessed to having a compact with Satan during the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland, which he confessed to King James as the trial proceedings were taking place, but later promised that he would renounce his compact with Satan and vow to lead the life of a Christian. But the next morning, he confessed the devil came to him in his cell dressed all in black and holding a white wand, demanding John continue his faithful service, according to his first oath and promise that he made. John testified that he renounced Satan to his face, saying, "Get thee behind me, thou Satan, and start pushing, for I have listened too much to thee, and by the same thou hast undone me, in respect whereof I will utterly undo you." He confessed that the devil then answered, "That once ere thou die, thou shalt be mine." The devil afterwards broke the white wand and immediately vanished from his sight. John then was given a chance to lead the life he promised, but the same night he stole a key to his cell and escaped. He was eventually captured and tortured until his execution on January 27th, 1591. And coming in at number 1 is General Jonathan Moulton. General Jonathan Moulton was born in the month of July 1726 and was not always extraordinarily wealthy. In the year 1749, he married his first wife and had 11 children with her. He soon settled in Hampton, Virginia, and surprisingly got filthy rich in no time. His sudden accumulation of so much wealth in such a short amount of time came as a surprise to the poor neighborhood, and it was alleged that he had made deals with the devil. Locals alleged that he had made a contract with the devil in which the devil was supposed to give him a boot full of gold. But Jonathan tore open the sole of the boot so that the boot would never be full of gold. When the devil learned that he was being tricked, he took revenge on him in the strangest way possible that cemented the face that they made a deal. Upon his death at the age of 61 years, his body went missing from the coffin, and instead the coffin was filled with gold coins, having the seal of Satan himself. The locals buried the gold-filled coffin anyway. His body was never found, and no grave mark was put in its place.